Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we are listening to Last Call at the Falls.
It was a Saturday evening, and I received a call over the radio to respond to the end of Fountain Avenue.
It was a very cold night.
The wind was whipping from Jamaica Bay.
Our pens froze and the pens wouldn't work. That's how cold it was. And I remember walking through the weeds a few feet off the street, and I seen what appeared to be a body wrapped in some kind of afghan. I feel like it was yesterday, even though it's 15 years later. I can still see her face. When the medical examiner arrived, they surveyed the scene. Then unraveled the blanket to determine the condition of the body. She had some kind of tape around her mouth. I observed some of her hair appeared to be cut off.
Her hands and her feet had been bound, and there were some broken fingernails.
At that point, we realized that she died a violent death. To see this girl to be in this condition and what she must have gone through and how she suffered kind of hit us all.
I was thinking that this is someone's daughter, this is someone's girlfriend, this is, somebody's family member.
So the best you can do is make sure the person that's responsible for her death is brought to justice. East New York is one of the more heavy crime areas. Sometimes the mob would dump bodies there.
In fact, a couple of blocks away, they built a shopping mall, and when they dug it up, they found several bodies there that were dumped over the years. You don't get killed on Fountain Avenue, you get dumped on Fountain Avenue. There's no fountains there either. Fountain Avenue is also known as a stroll. That is where prostitutes would walk and cars would pull up, and women would get in the car.
So at first, they thought that maybe it was somebody involved in the sex trade.
She had no identification on her. We know absolutely zero. So you have to look at this person and take in every little aspect of what you see, because every little thing could lead up to something that turns out to be something big.
The tape was removed from the victim during the autopsy. Adhesive tape is very valuable evidence because lots of different types of trace evidence may adhere to it.
Hair could trace back to a person, a fiber to an object or a piece of clothing that could lead them right back to the suspect.
There was several different types of fibers on the sticky side of the tape. Red fiber fibers, possibly from a carpet, pink fibers that was recovered.
Under the tape, the medical examiner found a sock in the victim's throat. The cause of death was asphyxiation.
While investigators were gathering key evidence, they still didn't know who this woman was. So they called in some help.
We reached out to the media, and we put out information in an attempt to find out who she was and where she was from.
And then it's up to each individual news agency to decide if they want to do something with it. So when I came in Sunday morning to work, I made a call to somebody I knew in the precinct.
Plus, we run stories on unidentified people. You know, hopefully someone will come forward and call police and say, we had a runaway, we have a missing cousin, daughter, mother. Maybe the next day, we started receiving phone calls.
And a woman read the article and thought, wow, that could be my cousin who's been missing for 2 days.
The cousin that called knew particular information about this female victim. We told him that the best thing at this point would be to come to the medical examiner's office.
So the cousin put them in touch with this girl's sister.
Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and her worst nightmare had just come true.
Now Jane Doe officially had a name. Annette Sakian.
When I found out Annette was horribly killed and that they found her, it was breathtaking in the worst way.
My friend Joe texted me like, "Oh my God, do you hear about Annette?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. When I found out about her murder, I just felt very numb and like shook me.
Everyone just kind of stopped, dropped, and cried. Long, hard tears. And to hear the way she was killed tore everybody apart.
The family was hysterical. Obviously, they were extremely distraught. But as much as you feel for the family, the case just can't stop. You have to move forward, you have to move fast.
So the sister spoke to police, and the police asked who was the last person that would have seen Emet. And the sister told them, talk to her best friend, because that's who Emet was with last night. The best friend told police what had happened the night before.
Annette and her best friend Claire were out to celebrate her 25th birthday, which was a few days away.
She met up with a bunch of her friends. They set out that night for a big pub crawl.
As the night went on, our friends started getting tired, so they started to break away.
And at a certain point, it just ended up being Claire and Emet. Hi, thank you. And Emet wanted to stay out longer.
So Claire desperately tried to get Annette into a cab with her.
Come on, let's go home. Oh, you're being so silly.
And Annette was stubborn. And Claire knew at that point she was not going to get Matt in a cab. So like any girlfriend does in that situation, you tell your best friend, please call me. Matt, call me in the morning. Annette had promised Claire that she would call her when she got home. All right, please. And she just went home.
Next morning, the best friend woke up. And realized she still hadn't heard from her.
She got very nervous. She went downtown and she investigated on her own. She went from bar to bar, talking to people and seeing if anyone had seen Annette that night.
She got that kind of classic New York response. Like, I haven't seen your friend. I don't know. She's drunk. She probably went out somewhere. Probably something stupid happened to her. She wasn't getting a lot of help.
Everyone that Claire spoke to either didn't see her or didn't care.
Claire continued to scour the neighborhood.
Can you take a closer look, please?
I haven't seen it. No study.
This one bar, she got a phone call telling her that Annette was found dead. She relayed that message to the manager, and he just shrugged and said, New York could be a tough town.
Because of the nature of the crime against Annette, the rage visited upon her and her body. The detectives had to look at someone she had a relationship with, a possible stalker, possible ex-boyfriend, a scorned lover, or someone she rejected, even.
And the best friend told them that she'd recently broken up with her boyfriend, but they had still been texting.
We didn't know their relationship. Maybe there was a problem. Maybe he was violent. Maybe they had some kind of dispute. Maybe this led to her death.
Police were starting to wonder if Annette had contacted her ex-boyfriend that night. And they were also starting to wonder, maybe a little jealousy, maybe a little alcohol turned into a fatal cocktail.
Who killed this honor student? This is worse than murder. This is punishing. This is torturing. This is subhuman.
Investigators found out that Annette recently broke up with her boyfriend. They also found out that he had contacted her the night of her death.
We didn't know their relationship. Maybe there was a problem. Maybe he was violent. Maybe they had some kind of dispute. Maybe this led to her death.
How long were you together?
Breakups and jealousy have been the motive for numerous murders in New York City and throughout the world.
I don't know anything, I swear.
So, for the moment, detectives thought this could be their guy. Until they heard his alibi.
He was out with his new girlfriend. There was no way to pick it apart, and we tried.
Yeah, we broke up, but we got along. We were friends.
He said that he had reached out to him at that night, and he said that everything was fine with him.
I'm sorry, I just need a minute.
Police soon realized that he was actually really heartbroken.
I'll answer anything, it's just a lot.
It was not a bitter, cantankerous, post-parting of the ways between lovers. They were still friends.
So while the police were investigating Annette's murder, the New York Post was also doing its own investigation. We were talking to witnesses and family and trying to determine what had happened.
I had to call my city desk, and this was right around deadline. they already had a lot of stories prepared for the next day's paper, and I told them, hey, this is a big story, it's a homicide, and started the ball rolling. We reached out to family and friends up in Boston, just trying to get somebody to tell us a little more about her.
And that's the hardest call for a reporter to make.
Met's mother was very gracious, but she was gone. You don't survive something like that. It just takes a part of you.
Just everything about her. I mean, it's a huge hole, big empty space. It's always going to be. She just made things fun, and you just felt so much better in her presence. When she walked into the room just lit up.
Yeah, I met Matt in high school. I still remember like how I felt when I met her. I mean, she radiated so much energy, her smile, and just she loved life. She told you, and she just makes you feel like you're the only one in the room.
When you first saw Annette, you're like, wow, she's beautiful. You wanted to know who she was. Long, beautiful hair. For me, I would like to have her wonderful teeth. You just couldn't believe her aura.
Annette had a tremendous family and a lot of really close friends, and she was extremely close to her sister.
Her sister spoke about her deeply, tremendously, passionately. So you knew that they were very close, very tight.
Annette's family always wanted her to stay in Boston. They loved her so much and they wanted to keep her close, but Annette wanted to travel. So Annette came to New York City to go to John Jay School of Criminal Justice because she wanted to major in criminal psychology. And she was in the top 5% of her class.
Met had worked at a rape crisis center in Washington, D.C., and after working with those women, she wanted to do something further with that. She wanted to affect change, and she wanted to help give a voice to the voiceless. Fortunately, instead of becoming an advocate or somebody who could help others, she became a victim herself.
And now it was up to investigators to help get her justice. In order to do that, they had to reconstruct the last hours of her life. They had to walk back and find out who she was hanging out with. What places did she end up?
We were trying to track her last steps. But after speaking to her friends, none of her friends knew where she went when she left them. So at that point, we had no idea where she went.
But investigators did find one seemingly useful piece of information.
One friend did say that she had been paying for drinks with a credit card. So then cops sent a subpoena for her credit card records, hoping it would reveal a clue.
So meanwhile, the detectives continued searching the area where she was last seen. They were going into bars, showing her picture around, seeing if anybody had seen her after she left the Pioneer Bar.
When we started to interview people, the bartenders, bouncers, people don't want to talk to the police. People seem to get very nervous, even if they're not involved, if they want to talk in any way to us.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Police were getting very frustrated at this point. After canvassing the neighborhood and talking to her friends and her family, they didn't seem to be getting anywhere.
We looked at other sexual assaults in the immediate area to see if there's any similarities in a crime.
This could be a serial criminal, somebody who's truly a predator and had committed other rapes, is this person going to commit this type of crime again if they're not captured?
So we looked into every possible way. And it turned out 2 weeks before Annette was attacked, there was a similar abduction. They found out that there was a woman who got into a livery cab a couple of blocks away from where Annette was found.
She was assaulted by the driver and then thrown out of the car.
The rape happened less than a mile from where Annette's body was found.
It was a February night. It would make sense that she would get in a cab to go home.
So now at this point, this is really shaping up to look like something very bad. There'd be a serial killer on their hands, a serial rapist.
And what if this was an escalation? And if that was the case, the police really needed to work quickly because this guy wasn't going to stop.
2 weeks before Annette St. Guillen was attacked, a woman was picked up in a cab called Gypsy Cab in New York and was attacked. The woman did survive the attack, but the detectives were interested in whether they were connected. The woman who was assaulted and thrown out of the cab, she did provide police with a sketch.
And she described a male in his late 20s, about 5'6", with Middle Eastern descent. When police are trying to hunt for a suspect, they'll often send either surveillance photos or a sketch of the perpetrator to the media. The idea is that we'll write it up and we'll put it in the paper to get the word out. We did them one better. We put it on the front page.
Once it came out that it could have been a cab driver that was responsible for Annette's murder, women took that very seriously in New York.
It was kind of like in 1977 when the Son of Sam serial killer was out. He was killing random couples in random locations, and everybody was terrified.
In the past year, a psychopathic gunman has killed 6 people and wounded 8 others in New York City. He calls himself the Son of Sam.
And Annette had just been this girl out going bar hopping with her friends. It was something that hit home to everybody because it could have been anybody.
It's put a scare in us to be a little bit more careful.
So meanwhile, the Post had sent a reporter up to Boston to cover Annette's funeral.
If you could have seen the amount of people that were there, it was like, wow, look at this. Look at these people. Look at all these people.
Annette's spirit was one of a lot of joy and a lot of, she really wanted to bring people together. There's no way to give up, right? It's just, we're all going to have to learn to move on.
And on her 25th birthday, as her family's supposed to be celebrating with her, they were gathered. But they were gathered around her, and she was in a box.
Standing in that line, I had an eagerness to get to the front because you just want to be with Annette, to see her for the last time, to tell her how sorry I was, to give the support. I was sorry that you don't have your best friend. I'm so sorry that you don't have your sister. I'm sorry.
It's just like a rush of different emotions. I just remember feeling really sad, really confused, really angry. It was just sad.
I can only just remember looking into the casket, and when you saw what that man did to her, And how he did that, where's the why in it?
Like, I just couldn't understand, and I couldn't wrap my head around, like, how can someone do that to another human being? There's just evil in the world, sometimes I feel like.
On the day of her funeral, Emmette's mother gave a very impassioned plea to the public. Knowing I'll never see her again. Never hear her voice. I cherish little things, and I want to be able to smell her. But I can't smell her.
She asked the public to come forward if anybody had any information because she didn't want to see what happened to her family happen to another family.
And the New York Post ran her plea in its entirety in our news pages.
And actually, the plea worked. The Canby did come forward.
He was a 28-year-old livery cab driver from Pakistan. And when police compared him to the sketch, the resemblance was uncanny.
After speaking with him and doing a complete background check on everything he told us, where he was, what he was doing, we determined that he wasn't involved in this crime.
He'd actually been in New Jersey, and his cell phone hits that they picked up verified that.
It's very frustrating because you want to call that family. You want to say, this is what we have. This is who did it. We want to bring closure to them as fast as we can. And every time you chase down a lead that proved to be negative, you wasted time.
But sometimes it only takes one break to turn it all around. Emmette's credit card records have finally come in.
We pretty much were able to go backwards from the last steps of our life.
Emmette's credit card information basically showed where Emmette was last seen was the Falls Bar on Lafayette Street.
And that was really interesting because police and the best friend had both gone to that bar already.
When we went into the Falls Bar, they didn't want us in the bar. And we spoke to the manager. He was very convinced with their answers.
Remember that whole New York is a tough town thing?
I'll tell you, New York's a tough town.
Well, this is the guy. And now, police knew that Emmette had been there the night that she was killed.
Why would you lie to police unless you had something to hide?
Once police received Emmette's credit card information, they realized the bar manager at one of the very first places where they went to interview lied.
No, I don't know who that is.
He told us he didn't recognize him.
Did you have a look?
Made him look at the picture a second time.
Yeah, I'm sure I know who that is.
He says, no, I don't remember her being here.
Okay.
So it raised my suspicion a little bit more.
That manager's name was Danny Dorian. The Dorian name is very well known in New York. It's infamous, actually. Danny Dorian's father owned Dorian's Red Hand, which is where Robert Chambers had met Jennifer Levin on the night he killed her during what he claimed was rough sex. And the New York Post called him the Preppy Killer.
It was one of the 1980s most notorious murders.
So what made this so shocking is it was almost exactly 20 years since Jennifer Levin's death that another young woman went to another Dorian family-owned bar and ended up dead.
We wanted to speak to the manager a little bit more. So we went back to the bar the following day. He wasn't there at that time. So we left again with no other information from the bar.
The next day, Danny Dorian came to the precinct with his lawyer.
At that point, I was like, well, now we're getting somewhere. Now maybe we'll get some answers to what really happened at that bar. Find out what he had to hide.
The young lady in question was Emet's dad.
He admitted that Emet came into the bar late at night.
He told us that she was alone.
She ordered 2 rum and cokes. It was almost closing time, and 20 minutes after she arrived, Danny told her, "You need to leave."
You gotta go, okay?
What?
You gotta go.
It's my birthday.
I don't care. Get out now.
You're being really mean.
She didn't want to leave.
I paid for that.
LJ, can I get you over here, please?
He told the bouncer to get her out of there.
I need to leave.
And that was the last time you saw her. Fine.
It was aggravating being lied to and led in the wrong direction. Now we waste all this valuable time. Because we were misled, this killer could have easily sexually assaulted someone else, or even worse, or killed someone else again.
Dorian lied because he knew the notoriety of the case in the 80s was so bad that he did not want to be connected to that again.
While it was frustrating for the police, at least now they had a solid timeline.
I had to get her out.
And after several excuses, he finally told police that Emet was last seen with the bouncer.
I had to escort her from the premises. LJ, can I get you over here, please?
After a week of lying to the police, Danny Dorian finally admitted that Emet St. Gian was in his bar and that she didn't leave alone.
I don't need somebody to walk me out. I'm fine.
A few minutes later, he heard arguing in the alleyway between the bar and the other building. And it was Emet and who he believed to be his bouncer.
Then it stopped. So he just went and continued cleaning up the bar and closing up. So the police asked Danny Dorian what was the name of the bouncer, and he gave it to them. Daryl Littlestrong.
The first thing we did after receiving information about the bouncer was I looked into his past.
So Daryl had several aliases. One was Johnny Handsome, another was Johnny Blaze. He was definitely trying to cover something up.
Turns out was a career criminal. Probably spent more time in jail than he did out of it. Drugs, armed robbery, strong arming.
When you put all this together, now it looks like he's more of a fit to a possible perpetrator we were looking for.
Gary,
When we first spoke to Daryl Littlejohn, he was very evasive, kind of cold. It was like you're talking to a robot.
oh no.
He can care less if the police are talking to him. At first, he didn't admit to even speaking to Emet.
But as the hours passed, his story kept changing.
Oh, all right. I saw her.
He said, oh yeah, I remember her at the bar.
Daryl told police that, yes, he did walk Emet out of the bar and that she just went on her way and then he got in his car and went his way home.
And that's it.
After everything he was telling us added up to another lie, another lie, another lie, he was obviously hiding something.
So at that point, cops didn't have enough to hold Daryl on Emmett's murder. But Daryl was subject to a 9 p.m. curfew under his parole guidelines.
Kind of hard for a bouncer who closes a bar at 4 a.m. To make a 9:30 curfew.
So they had him on a parole violation.
It not only bought them time to investigate the murder, but if he truly was the murderer, it kept him off the street.
And that's when we decided to dig a little deeper.
We got the idea that, well, if it was that late at night, 4 in the morning, there was likely not many people around, but there would be one thing in New York that's a constant: homeless people. One reporter found a homeless guy that saw Emmett and Daryl Littlejohn leave together from the bar. The man went on to explain that Emmett did seem intoxicated, and that Littlejohn had to hold her or she would have fallen. And he said that Littlejohn had a dark blue van, and she got in it. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll take you home." And she never got home.
So the Post immediately told the police about that. But when police showed the homeless man several pictures, guess who he picked out?
So now they have a witness identifying Daryl Littlejohn. They were able to get a warrant to search his house. And when police arrived at Daryl Littlejohn's home, they found in his driveway the exact van that was used to take Emmett from the bar that night.
And that was just the beginning.
They went into Littlejohn's basement apartment.
And they found several things that were very interesting. A red carpet, which looks similar to the fibers that were found on the tape around Emmett's mouth. They also found several fur coats, which again was similar with the fur that was found around the tape.
All the evidence that was submitted and analyzed pointed to Daryl Littlejohn. Everything matched.
But that wasn't all.
Today, we're announcing a break in this case. Daryl Littlejohn's blood was found on plastic ties that were used to bind Emmett's hands, and a DNA match to Littlejohn was made. As a result of this and other evidence, Littlejohn is the prime suspect in this case, and his indictment will be sought for the murder of Emmett Sanghia.
When I found out that Emmett's killer was caught, it was like, God. It was a great, great, great moment.
That's it.
So now that police had enough to arrest him, they thought it was over, but they were wrong.
When Daryl was arrested, we ran a picture of him, and we also ran a picture of the van that he used. And 2 women came forward. Both women said that Daryl said he was a member of law enforcement and that he tied their hands up. One woman said that he tried to sexually attack her, but she was able to fight him off and jump out of the van. The second woman said that Daryl took her in the van, took her to his apartment, and raped her.
What these attacks told police was exactly what they feared all along. That he was a serial rapist who escalated to murder.
So we knew at this point, not only did we have the right guy, but we were definitely preventing more crimes. This wasn't his first crime. This wasn't even the first time he does something like this, but it was going to be his last.
After cops were able to charge him with those 2 attacks in Queens, Daryl was charged with first-degree murder and rape of Emmett Sanghia.
At the trial, the prosecutors used this evidence to lay out their theory of what happened that night.
We know that he escorted her, carried her, however he got her into his van, and he drove away with her.
Little John found Emmette's wrists and drove her to his aunt's in Queens.
When Daryl was attacking Emmett, she started fighting back. She had defensive wounds all over her body.
She was likely screaming. And that's when the police believe Daryl Littlejohn shoved the sock down her throat to keep her quiet. As she struggled to breathe, Daryl Littlejohn finished the job by crushing her windpipe. After he killed her, he wrapped her face in packing tape. And he cut off pieces and chunks of her hair. And we can only speculate as to why he did that.
At that point, he wrapped her up, put her in his van, and brought her to East New York.
He just threw her out of his vehicle like she was garbage, and he just drove away.
Seven hours to convict Little John. That's a pretty quick conviction.
We would like to thank the New York City Police Department for its excellent work over the past weeks.
I would say Matt is in heaven right now, hitting the gavel, saying we won. She made sure he got what was coming to him. And it was almost like I could see it going. Case closed.
And Matt definitely made a difference in my life. She sort of made me live life a little better, I guess. And I'll always remember that, just how she made me feel and just the joy, the smile, the energy she brought to the world and to the people around her.
If Emmett had lived, she'd have done anything she wanted to do with her life. The way she was, I think the world would have known of Emmett by now. I would often say, you wouldn't know me. You should know of me. The world would have known of Emmett St. Pierre.
Harvey was a creature of habit. Every morning, he'd leave his house in Upper East Side. He'd go to Queens. He'd stop at the diner, get breakfast. But that morning, he left the diner around 9 a.m. to get in his car and go to work. And all of a sudden, two people came up to him and pushed him into a car at knife point. He said, yeah, take my money, take my car. But this was not a mugging. They were looking for more.
And he had no clue where he was at that point. And he's thinking, they're going to bury me alive.
So it was around 10 a.m., and Harvey didn't show up to a very important meeting about the future of his company, Lord West. In the 90s, Lord West was the premier men's formal wear company. We're talking about a company that sold 100,000 tuxedos a year to people like Ralph Lauren and Pierre Cardin.
Harvey Weinstein was the tuxedo king of New York.
In New York City, people like to dress up. If you have wealth, you like to show it off. And a lot of socialites and wealthy people, they show them off at galas and various charity events. And if you're at any New York gala, you're likely wearing a Lord West tuxedo.
Even though Harvey had dressed the most elite people in New York, he really kept under the radar.
Harvey was a humble guy. Like he had money. He lived on the Upper East Side. Couldn't rub elbows with the rich and famous, but he'd rather eat in a diner in Queens. He was a self-made man. Came up, a kid from Brooklyn, like me. Well, he made a lot more money than I did.
Harvey's goal was to bring everyone around him up with him. He always was respectful of everyone's opinion and had such integrity and was just a phenomenal mentor. I went on in life, I would think of things in terms of how would Harvey handle this? What would Harvey say? And I think a lot of people felt the same way about him.
Harvey was a man who believed in giving people second chances. He believed in pulling people up by the bootstrings.
If his workers came to him and needed anything, he was the first person to help them out.
He's just like part of my family. I'm working here with a man for 25 years. He looks out for his workers.
We love that guy. We don't feel him as a boss. He's our friend. I wish everybody else have a bosses like that.
A lot of people credited the success of the company to his leadership style, and he was ready to take it even further.
Harvey had just taken out a $3 million loan, and the company was discussing expansion at that point. So Harvey was 45 minutes late for a very important meeting, which was so unlike him. This is a guy that you could set your watch by, and everybody started to get really scared.
And then his daughter called.
The meeting, Harvey was supposed to go pick up his daughter, but he didn't make it to the airport. Harvey said he's going to pick you up. He'd be there. So they became concerned. They just knew something had to happen for him not to be there. So at that point, several other executives from Lord West went to the diner to ask if he had been there that morning. When they found out he was, everybody in their different cars started spreading out, looking in the area for Harvey's car to see if something had happened, But after an exhaustive search, the executives went back to the family and said they weren't able to find Harvey or the car.
Harvey's family was fully panicked. They knew something bad must have happened to him, and they went straight to the police.
Harvey's family tried to file a missing persons report at the 19th precinct.
But police couldn't file the report.
There was nothing really suspicious other than the fact that he wasn't where he was supposed to be.
48 hours is the normal time that you would start an investigation. The police department can't go out every time they get a phone call that somebody's missing. You get children all the time that go out, play somewhere, and they don't come home for 2 hours. So if the missing person squad went out on every call, there'd be no missing person squad.
But Harvey's family was insistent. They knew something was up.
And they were going to do anything they possibly could to get their father back.
So, because they couldn't file a report, they made the call to City Hall.
Harvey was this very unassuming person. But then, on a regular basis, he'd be hitting tennis balls with Mayor Dinkins They lived in the same neighborhood on the Upper East Side, so they were friends. They knew each other well.
In the early 90s, I would get a daily briefing on crimes. And this was the real deal. He was a prominent businessman. Well, he disappeared in daylight hours. So we definitely marshaled forces and were very much concerned from the get-go.
So I was in my office. I received a phone call from the chief of detectives to go down to missing, let them know that they had this situation, waive the 48-hour protocol. I let them know that we have to find out what the hell was this about. That was the start.
What no one could have known was just how dire Harvey's situation really was.
So you have to understand, Harvey was shackled. He couldn't move. He was terrified, and he just kept asking them, why me? What have I done? And just as Harvey was at his most petrified, they told him, your family has got to pay us $3 million or they will never see you again.
The last person to be missing for 6 minutes, let alone 20 hours, was Harvey Weinstein. Harvey's children, they were besides themselves. They had no answers. This was totally out of character.
We put out an APB on Harvey and his car.
Investigators scoured the city looking for Harvey, and they found nothing.
So investigators started talking to his kids. They wanted to get an idea of Harvey's routine and how he started his day.
The family told the police that Harvey every morning went to the same Queen's Diner for breakfast.
We went to the diner and canvassed all the employees and folks that lingered around the diner.
We interviewed the waitress. We interviewed the manager. They both said that Harvey had been there that morning. He ate, he left, and they didn't see anything. Did you see a scuffle in a parking lot, anything like that? No, we didn't see anything.
We just didn't know what was going on.
So later that night, the police finally got a break. Call had come in from a patrolman out in Queens that saw Harvey's car.
It was recovered in Brooklyn, I believe in the 83rd precinct, which kind of borders Queens.
Investigators inspected the car, and they found something really strange. There were no fingerprints.
It looked like whoever drove it there wiped it clean, like it was waxed, and so all fingerprints were removed from the car.
Just reeks of suspicion. Who would clean a car like that? Unless you did something really bad with it, you know?
They knew that Harvey was in danger, and they knew they had to move really fast. Every second counts in a situation like this.
We were on high alert, but it wasn't considered a kidnapping until the ransom call came in. That
that morning, there was a call that came into the factory of Lord West Tuxedo Company. It was a woman with a raspy voice and a foreign accent.
This is the Black Cat organization. We have Harvey Weinstein. We demand $3 million ransom. We will be in touch.
So now Major Case took over the investigation from missing persons, and that's how we got involved in it.
From that point, we tried doing follow-up to see if there was any information on a Black Cat organization. Something that, we've never heard of.
We have a unit, a gang unit. We run this name by them. Never heard of it. Then I said reluctantly, call the feds, see if they have anything on it. Never heard of it.
When you think of organizations, it could be anything. Is it a terrorist group? Is it a drug organization? We don't know. All the results were coming back negative.
So while the police were trying to figure out who these people could be, they realized that they had to call Harvey's family and let them know. The most important thing for the police was to keep everything very quiet. The only people who could know were the ones that were closest to Harvey. They just said, Harvey's been kidnapped, and we're praying that he's okay. He was like a grandfather. We tried to hold that out, that they wouldn't do something that stupid as to harm him, But we didn't know. We didn't know.
When you deal with a case like this, you're just trying to get your victim back as safe as possible, as quickly as possible. Time is not on your side.
But there was one thing that really stuck out in investigators' minds, and it was something that the kidnappers had said.
A woman on the phone was requesting $3 million in cash.
The management of Lloyd West knew he got the loan, $3 million in cash.
And it seemed like it was more than just a coincidence.
We started looking at this company where he worked.
These people have access to Harvey Weinstein. They see him on a daily basis.
As the investigation began, detectives realized that they had to tread really lightly here because the stakes were very high. Only the top people at Lord West even knew that an investigation was taking place.
We took every single person's name and did a criminal background check on them. We checked who would know that there was that amount of money available at that time of year. Who was missing that day? Who was not at work?
But a look at the records revealed that everybody from the boardroom to the factory had punched in that morning.
There was nothing of any significance found.
As detectives were digging for clues at Lord West, they had no idea that Harvey was just 5 miles away, buried underground. Harvey had been without food and water for 2 days, and he had to be thinking that he's been left for dead. And suddenly, he sees light. The hole opens up.
Now, it wasn't a lot of food, but it was something.
Harvey's instincts kicked in because he was a former Marine. That being in the hole was like being in the trenches again.
Supplies are unloaded and moved up. Basin moves inland through the swamp.
Harvey, when he became 18, he joined the Marines, and next thing you know, he was on the sands of Iwo Jima fighting for our country in World War II, and he was very proud of that fact.
He knew he had to keep his wits about him if he was going to survive.
He knew with his training that the banana would go bad first, so he had to eat that first. Then he could always save the apple. And he would have to really ration that water.
With his first bit of energy in days, Harvey got an idea. He had one chance at freedom, one chance to get out, and Harvey was going to take that chance
Harvey did everything he could, but all he had to eat was a banana and some water. He was 68 years old. Harvey didn't have the strength to push a 125-pound piece of metal. His mind was probably playing tricks on him at that point. Harvey was lying in a dark hole. He had no way out. And the only thing that was keeping him from really losing his mind is thinking about the possibility that he could be rescued.
In 1993, we had close to 2,000 murders in the city. For us, at the Post, we were doing like 5, 6 a day. One of the main reasons was the crack epidemic then and people fighting for turf. It was a totally different city. But
Kidnappings were up because they were drug related. Now, this was our 26th kidnapping of the year. And this is only August.
A task force was put together to investigate the kidnapping.
We had a team of detectives around the clock at Harvey's residence, just in case the perpetrators tried to communicate with the family. And we could interpret and hand out the information immediately to all the detectives and everyone working on the case.
Investigators had to keep a low profile. They had to make sure that the kidnappers didn't realize that they were looking into the case. The first rule the kidnappers had given the family is not to contact the police.
For the first couple of days, we were on standby, waiting for a lead to come in, waiting for something to follow up on.
Harvey's family had no control over whether their father lived or died, and that's a terrible place to be.
Hello? This is the Black Cat organization. We demand $3 million in ransom, $2 million in $100 bills, and $1 million in $50 bills.
Finally, after days of no phone calls, the family catches a break. The same woman called them and said, head to the West Side Highway with the cash and someone will meet you.
It's up to the family if they want to pay the money. We always tell them, you're better off doing a dummy drop. We'll cut up newspapers, we'll make it look like dollar bills. The family said, we are willing to let this money go. All we want is our father back. 1 million in 50s, 2 million in hundreds. It was 86 pounds. It's the most money I ever had, ever.
Over the next couple of hours, Harvey's son prepared to meet at this location, and the cops were going to follow.
We had 4 or 5 unmarked cars on him, nondescript vehicles. You know, we didn't need him getting kidnapped also.
So Harvey's son got to the location with the cash.
And he waited.
And he waited.
And he kept waiting.
But they never showed up.
And that was the first of many frustrating calls with the Black Cat organization. Over the next several days, the kidnappers called and they gave locations for the family to meet them, and for whatever reason, they didn't show up.
We're starting to think, are these guys playing with us? We just didn't know.
We were doing 16-hour days. Normally, things that didn't bother me started to bother me. So the pressure started to get to you.
So So now it was 6 days in, and investigators knew one false move could blow this whole thing up. The only good thing was that nobody knew about the investigation. It was still covert.
If the story got out there, it could be just a case of death. The kidnappers could just say that rather than collect the money, we just leave him where he is.
But nobody knew about it. Not the kidnappers, not the media, no one. Until Larry.
1993, I was a police reporter for the New York Post working out of police headquarters. I would cover everything that would come in on the overnights and start out in the morning. That morning, rode up in the elevator to the major case office. And I was pretty friendly with a lot of people, from the boss on down to the person that answered the phone. So I walked in there, and everybody's face, went white. Everybody was, quiet. I knew there was something up. Then I just started asking around. But early the next day, I had Harvey's name, who he was.
So this story has New York Post written all over it. You have a wealthy businessman kidnapped in broad daylight, and there's a $3 million ransom. It's the type of story you only come across once or twice in your lifetime, if that.
So now I went back to find out what was going on.
Larry showed up. Says, hey, you're running a kidnapping on some guy named Weinstein? I looked, I said, Larry, you print that, you're going to get the man killed.
I knew it was a big story. I mean, to not run the story, it goes against your instincts. But we did a story, Harvey's life, would be in jeopardy. I just found out that Harvey Weinstein was kidnapped and was being held for $3 million ransom.
Whether we were going to write about Harvey's kidnapping was a very important decision. As journalists, you're taught the first thing that you should do is make sure that you inform the public.
What if we did a story, someone could get killed? So we made the decision we weren't going to do it.
We were just grateful.
Yeah, for that, we were very appreciative.
I said to Larry, you're going to get the exclusive. Larry was guaranteed that he'd get the first shot. Once we knew that, everybody was safe and sound, if that day came.
While Larry continued to monitor the story from the sidelines, the calls kept coming in to the family.
So Harvey's family was very concerned. They want to know if these kidnappers were just stringing them along.
Certainly in the back of their minds, they knew that their father could no longer be alive.
So that's when we asked the kidnappers for proof of life.
We're, holding our breath.
Hello?
Dad. He said he was okay and that the family should deliver the money.
When Harvey's family finally got the phone call from Harvey, they were elated because they knew at that point he was alive. But they didn't know for how much longer. Harvey did not sound like himself. They could tell from his voice that he had been through a really traumatic situation, and it terrified them. So Harvey's family and the police waited nearly 2 days for a phone call.
It had to be around 2, 3 in the morning. They gave us a location to go to, which was right by a park.
Harvey's son drove up to the location with the bags in the car.
And all of a sudden, a station wagon came by. This guy walks up to Harvey's son, tells him Black Cat Organization, and he put one bag in the station wagon. He took the other bag and he walked into the park. About 15, 20 minutes later, this individual walks out of the park and he got on the phone and he said, I got it all, pick me up. And the same station wagon came and picked him up.
Police kept an eye on the station wagon, but they were staying back because they didn't want to do anything to scare the kidnappers into harming Harvey if he was still alive.
I can hear the guy saying, I got him, he's at 174. Then you hear another car say, I got him at 168.
Police tailed the car from a distance, keeping out of sight until the 3-hour mark.
It was 3 hours, 10 minutes. I looked on my watch and I said, take the car. And then it became a chase.
Police tailed the car, flying up the West Side Highway until it pulled over.
So we stopped at the old polo grounds where the New York Giants baseball team used to have their stadium. And there's some catacombs there. The individual ran into the catacombs and we went in after him.
Finally, they hit a dead end. The perpetrator was taken into custody.
And it turned out that Harvey knew the suspect really well.
His name was Furman Rodriguez. He was an employee of Lord West Tuxedo Company.
Furman was a sewing machine operator at Harvey's company. The license plates from the station wagon turned out to be registered to Furman's apartment on 110th Street. And so police were hoping that that's where Harvey would be.
So they did an exhaustive search of the apartment. No Harvey.
They did find other evidence.
Those teams recovered the bag of money that was taken from the scene, and they had it in a bag cover.
And as the police were going through Furman's apartment looking for evidence, he was already being questioned downtown. The police had taken him to their headquarters at One Police Plaza.
We knew that time was of the essence, and our only connection to the victim at this point was Furman Rodriguez. So I needed to create some sort of a rapport with this individual. So it started out slowly, just trying to get general information. And there was something about this guy. I mean, this guy was just able to lie without really any effort. And that's not easy to do. Usually when you lie and you want to build more lies on top of that, you get caught in a corner. You have to back out of it. This guy just spun a web. He had the knack, he had the gift to just keep going. After a couple of hours, he came out with a story that I thought was a lie. It was just very hard to believe.
So Furman told Detective Santiago that Harvey was in a hole up along the West Side Highway.
I just didn't understand what he was trying to say, that he's being held in a hole. That just didn't make any sense to me. But he kept repeating himself. He's in a hole. And finally, we decided to say, Well, if what you're really saying is true, we want you to bring us there. Show us where this is so that we can get him. So he drove us to an area around the West Side Highway and 158th Street in Manhattan. And when you get to that area, there's a service road. And I say, now what? Where's this hole?
We had to walk about a half mile. And then you had to cross the railroad tracks. And then there was another fence. Well, I was so wiped out, I didn't have the ability to climb the fence. So I stayed down below with Furman.
You know, it was a steep incline. We climbed up the hill. It's a wooded area. You can hear the cars going by. I figured maybe there'd be a small structure up there, maybe an old shed. But as we're there, we're looking around, there's nothing like that. It's just trees, rocks. And we just decided to start calling out the name Harvey. So like Furman at this point was sending us on a wild goose chase.
I said to myself, when I retire, I don't want to ask myself, whatever happened to Harvey Weinstein? So, you know.
Not here. It's over.
We heard a little murmur. We heard something.
Harvey!
So we followed to the area where the voice was coming from, and on the ground there was a metal slab, some planks of wood. We just cleared that out of the way, and we lift the metal slab that was on top of what was covering this hole. And we saw Harvey. And it was just a great surprise. I mean, it was unbelievable. When we opened up the hole and the sunlight hit his face, it was just an expression that I've never experienced before. And one of the first things he did was just take in the fresh air. He just needed to breathe the air. And as he breathed the air, he looked up at the sky, at the light, and you could just see the joy in his face.
Oh, it was joy and jubilation. I mean, it's just amazing.
Harvey standing on level ground, breathing fresh air, and then the first thing he asked for was,
"Can I have a cigarette?" We just knew that was typical Harvey. But he still had a sense of humor, right? After all of that. Amazing.
I'm telling you, I wouldn't have survived that. There's no way I would have survived that. Sitting in a hole for 13 days, I wouldn't have survived that. I'd have been a babbling idiot when you took me out.
So Harvey was taken to the hospital where the doctors did a complete examination of him, found out he was a very healthy man, even though he didn't eat in the last 2 weeks.
You were static, you know. I'll tell you, I drove home that night. I was breaking up all the way home. I had to pull off the side of the road a couple of times just to clear my eyes.
So at that point, Commissioner Kelly lived up to his deal. And I talked to Harvey that night in his home.
I feel great, not good, great.
He's just told us how you live for so long.
The United States was made 50 years ago.
Because I was in the Marine Corps, talked to him a little bit about that, and he just seemed to have no lasting effect from being held for 13 days. So just a remarkable case.
It said that events don't make the man, they reveal him. And I think that's precisely what happened in the case of Harvey Weinstein. He shows the true grit of a true New Yorker.
Different type of person. How many people could be in that situation and come out the way they went in, you might say?
I'm so proud of our police department and to the media, the New York Post in particular, who may have known something of this, but were mindful of the need to have secrecy so that we would increase the chances of producing a Harvey in one piece.
And through this little aperture that he had pulled, I knew I was home. I knew I was safe. And I knew God had smiled down on me.
So over the next several days, investigators were able to question Furman, and they got a full confession out of him.
There was a rumor going through that the company was in trouble, needed a loan, and Harvey had got it.
Furman Rodriguez recruited a couple of his friends to come and abduct Harvey Weinstein.
Meanwhile, Furman's friend Orlita Leonore was the person who was making the phone calls for the Black Cat organization. And it turns out that was just the name that Furman randomly picked out.
I don't think he really thought of the consequences. He probably thought that he can get money from the family and just run off and live his life.
Furman's brother Antonio wasn't sent to trial. He was instead sent to an asylum. He was sent to Ward's Island. I think it probably really rocked Harvey's world to think that this was an inside situation. You know, it's hard to take. You make it look bad.
That hurt more than anything. That was one of my own people. I felt so betrayed by that.
Mr. Weinstein, have you sold the rights to your story yet?
No.
Have a lot of offers?
I can't discuss that. I want to retreat back to who I really am. Anonymous Harvey Weinstein.
So eventually, Harvey had a few meals, gained a few pounds, and then that Monday he went back to work.
It looked like he'd been in the hole for 14 days. He looked a little rough around the edges, but he still had that sparkle. He still had that drag.
I was very inspired by his will to live. You know, think about 12 days in solitary. I mean, beyond solitary. It was amazing. He was an extraordinary person. So, I mean, a man was a survivor. It was early in the morning on the Henry Hudson Parkway, and a couple of construction workers were walking down the road.
You know, people are going about their normal lives, and suddenly one of the road workers noticed this horrible odor. He probably figured somebody had just discarded something and something had rotted. I'm sure he would have never imagined the true horror that was inside that cooler.
The cops in the 34th precinct were called to a possible homicide, so they assumed that it was going to be a regular day. And then they found out very quickly that it was going to be anything but.
In that cooler was the remains of a young female child.
It is just the most disturbing crime you can come across.
I looked over the side of the road and I see the cooler. Tipped it over. A bunch of soda cans fell out. Coke cans. Then a bag. Opened the bag up. Saw a body.
Where you can't recognize a human body, the smell, the bloating, and just the decay of the flesh. They described it as just horrific. It was like this precious little girl had been ditched on the side of the road like rubbish. It must have been very clear to the police that the person responsible for this was a monster and a danger to the community, and that they had to find this killer.
But first, investigators needed to find out who she was.
It was so important to try and identify her so that we could find the killer because she was so young and she was so small. You think it's a baby, but we didn't know her age at the time.
Detectives canvassed the grounds, full of evidence, but there was nothing found.
But investigators didn't give up. I mean, they pulled out all of the stops to try to get to the bottom of this.
Investigating a homicide.
We literally had Crime Stopper vans driving through neighborhoods from 155th Street to 217th Street with megaphones on top, looking for witnesses to try and find out who that person was.
But they turned up empty-handed. They found nothing.
And that's when they called us at the Post.
The New York Post ran a story urging the public to help them try and identify this mystery girl who was discovered.
When we put the story out there, New Yorkers reacted with horror. This is something that really got people where they lived. So while the police searched for leads, the child's body was taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy.
In terms of the emotional aspect, the death of any child is extremely difficult. And this was this horrific. She was a small child and she was badly decomposed. She had long hair. She had a hair tie with some yellow bobbles on it. Her body had been folded in half and rope was tied around her neck and around her calves to keep the body folded over. We classified her as Hispanic. We identified her as being approximately 4 years old on the basis of her dentition, her teeth, and the age of her bones in her body.
The medical examiner confirmed that this little girl was 3 feet 2 inches tall and severely malnourished, weighed, when alive, approximately 25 pounds.
It was clearly a homicide. And I felt most likely the cause of death, the way she was killed, was by asphyxia and smothering.
The autopsy results showed that what this girl went through in her final days was horrendous. And it only got worse.
As the examination went on, we did swabs and we later identified semen in her genitals. This is a child who had sexual contact with a mature male. It was repellent.
It's just so difficult to comprehend that somebody could commit such a monstrous act against a child that's that young and that defenseless and that helpless and that innocent.
I have children. And what's to say that could be your child?
It's one thing when an adult is victimized, but it's another thing when it's a small child. And that's why this case weighed so heavy on everyone. And that just kind of makes you have more of a drive to try to get an arrest.
To the NYPD, this certainly strengthened their resolve and made it almost like a mission to them.
First things that the detectives did was check the database to see if a missing child had been reported. There was no child at that time fitting her description and her age reported missing. It's just really perplexing why this little girl goes missing and nobody came forward, not the family, not neighbors. Nobody seems to notice that this young girl has just vanished into thin air.
It may be that nobody else was seeking justice for her. That really hit home for the detectives. And it really gave the sense that perhaps they felt they needed to step up where no one else would.
The prison became her family. And we wanted to give some dignity to her.
So they named her and called her Baby Hope, because at that point, that's all they had was hope that they would be able to bring her killer to justice.
The name, it somehow kept her alive.
One of the most challenging parts of this case were there were no pictures of baby Hope. They didn't know what she looked like. They couldn't, put her photo out there to try and get the community's help.
So a forensic anthropologist was used to establish a facial recognition of that child based on her bone structure.
And for the detectives, this is really the first time that they got to see what Baby Hope would have looked like, which, of course, humanized her and made her a person as opposed to just an idea of something horrible that had happened.
You can still see the picture, you don't forget it. She just looked like a small, average, everyday child.
The police sent this sketch to the New York Post. And so the Post published this picture of her. And that really elicited a ton of responses from the public.
You just hope that was the information that the media puts out there, that someone will know something.
Somebody always sees something. There's always somebody looking out a window. Nothing that's done and kept secret will remain a secret. The truth will always come out.
After a child mysteriously turned up dead, both the police and the public were desperate to find out what had happened. From the outset, the Post was all over this story, providing details to readers about the child that the police had named Baby Hope to inform them and hopefully get some answers. And it worked.
A witness came forward with a tip that she thought was related to the case after reading the story in the newspaper.
She said on a Sunday morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning, while her and her husband were traveling south on the Hanyatsu Parkway, they saw a man and a woman carrying a cooler.
They were a well-dressed Hispanic couple, but they could not see their faces.
It's not normal to see a man and a woman carrying a cooler along the side of a highway. Where was the car parked that they carried the cooler from?
And the witness seemed credible. They didn't appear to have any ulterior motive. They weren't asking for a reward. She was so certain of what she had seen that cops believed her, and they felt certain that they had a really solid lead to go on.
You have a man and a woman, so what's the relation between those two adults and that child?
They could surmise potentially that there was some relationship there, but that's really all that they had to go on. So what the detectives had to do was use what little they had, the fact that Baby Hope had been sexually abused. And we're thinking maybe this is a father, or maybe this is a male guardian of some sort, or maybe a mother's boyfriend. And there's always the possibility that the killer was being protected by a family member.
Why didn't we have a family in the lobby of the precinct saying, "Where is she? We can't find her"? It was like someone was hiding something, but why?
There was the open question of whether there was a predator here. So not only if this could happen again, but when.
There was a real feeling of urgency to this case. time, they're trying to identify these two people, but there was a problem. The witness didn't have any really in-depth details about what they look like. A Hispanic man and woman. This vague description that could match hundreds of thousands of people in New York City. We didn't have anything further to go on, so we didn't have anything to follow up on other than what you saw. They set up a tip hotline with a $12,000 reward, just try and track down anything that can bring the case forward.
Unfortunately, despite the efforts of the police for a second time, they didn't get any new information. Police knew that every second counted to find Baby Hope's killer. Other children could be in danger. So unfortunately, those fears became reality.
Photos were found at a photo development store, and they depict really sick images of a man with a little girl.
It was clear that they were pictures of a crime. So police either had visual evidence of what had happened to Baby Hope, or another little girl was in terrible danger. Police were in a race against the clock to find Baby Hope's killer, when they were presented with some truly terrifying physical evidence.
Photos were found at a photo development store that was nearby of a older man with a very, very young girl. And this girl had features similar to Baby Hope, and it was child pornography.
Hi, this is Detective Resnick. Can I speak to someone in the photo lab department, please?
So because of the nature of those pictures, the store owner at this place where the film was developed notified the police of what he saw.
Police were able to get the man's address from the photo development store.
They interrogated him.
And then he confessed to a truly horrible crime, but not the one that they were expecting.
It turned out that he was the grandfather who had taken these images with his granddaughter. They were able to bring charges against this man, and detectives essentially saved another little girl.
So the good news is that there was one more predator off the streets, but Baby Hope's killer was still out there. So the New York Post ran the story again.
For the New York Post readers, they felt the frustration that the person who committed this horrific crime was still out there, and that this little girl did not have justice.
Unfortunately, the leads really still weren't going anywhere. And for the cops, who took this case so personally, this was getting devastating. In an unexpected way, Baby Hope had sort of become a family member to these detectives. And they did for her what her own family could not.
They decided to use their own money to give this little girl a proper burial.
One of the detectives actually gave their child's own communion gown, and they laid it on top of her in her casket.
It's a somber day, very somber day. I remember just looking at the coffin because, it's going to close. And that's it.
hundreds of people showed up for this. People who didn't know who she was, but they felt connected to her.
A little girl now has 5 years old and she died. I don't know why they killed her.
Besides the fact that this child was so brutally tortured and everything else, no one came to claim her. You know, we feel that it's necessary to be here for her.
Baby Hope had become New York's baby.
These people thought enough to take time out of their day to go and celebrate the life she didn't have.
After the funeral, she was taken to a cemetery where she was buried. We paid for a headstone and had it engraved because we care. To let her know and anybody else know that there was no detective in the 3-4 precinct who was ever going to put this away. Unfortunately, one of the saddest parts is once she was buried, the leads pretty much dried up. And 16 years went by. But as the years passed, so did advances in forensic science. After the World Trade Center disaster in 2001, we had so much drive to try and identify the victims of 9/11 that my office began to develop new techniques. And each year they would be able to advance the science and identification, help us identify more and more people. Because of the efforts of the medical examiner's office, cold cases were starting to get solved. So Baby Hope's remains were exhumed for DNA testing. We took a bone sample. The hope was that if we had a good DNA profile, our chances of finding someone related to her would increase. This was a very difficult process because there was very little bone material that was usable because of the advanced, deterioration of her remains. With a little bit of luck, we're actually able to get a usable profile from the bone sample. They finally had a DNA profile of Baby Hope. Now they just needed a match. So they ran it through all the existing databases of missing persons throughout the country, hoping that they were going to find something. The DNA tests took weeks to process. You've got to imagine the anticipation. I mean, this was it. They'd been waiting for this. Unfortunately, they came up empty. They got no hits. But it wasn't as if everything was lost. Because now they at least had a DNA profile, which meant there was a potential that they would be able to match it to a family member at some point in the future.
Every year, it just made sure that the media always kept her memory, her face out there trying to get leads, trying to get a resolution. And on the 22nd anniversary of Baby Hope's death, they finally got a tip.
NYPD.
I was working in Crime Stoppers, and I got a call.
Yes, how may I help you?
Caller said that she saw the news and she thought she had information about this child.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yes, tell me what you got.
She remembers a conversation she'd overheard a few years before. It was at a laundromat where a young woman said to a friend that she had a little sister who vanished, and she believed that she may have been murdered.
And that she saw the baby in the refrigerator in a plastic bag dead, which was then later removed and put in a cooler.
Can I get your name, please?
I knew that what she was saying had to be valid because there was just so much detailed information.
Okay, great. I will meet you there. Thank you so much.
detectives went to the laundromat, and it turned out that the woman who had engaged in this conversation was the niece of the laundromat owner.
Her name was Lawrencita, and investigators were able to get her address from the owner of the laundromat.
So they tracked down Lawrencita to Sunset Park, where she shares an apartment with her husband.
So they got there, and they really didn't know what to expect. She answered the door, and it was like looking at a ghost. A sketch of baby Hope. This was her face, but it was on the face of a grown woman. So after 22 years of working the case, detectives were finally face to face with a woman who might be baby Hope's relative. This was uncanny. The woman looked like baby Hope, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. It was like baby Hope come to life 20 some odd years later.
I'm just following up with you on a cold case into Buffalo.
Her name is Lawrencita. She had grown up in the Bronx, the daughter of Mexican immigrants. And she told the cops that when she was around 11 years old, she had been reunited with a sister named Maribel. And her sister Maribel told Lawrencita that she had overheard that they had another sister whose name she didn't know, but that something bad had happened to her. So when Lawrencita saw these pictures that the police had of baby Hope, she knew in her heart that this little girl was probably her sister. And whatever dark secret her family was harboring, Lawrencita knew that it had to come to light, and she was willing to work with authorities to make that happen. Now, this was immensely helpful, but it was by no means ironclad. This was limited information, and it was also secondhand, but it was a lead. Police also had baby Hope's DNA profile, but for that, a sibling isn't going to help. You need the parents' DNA profile. So to confirm if baby Hope was her sister, the cops asked Lawrencita where her parents were, and it turned out that her mother, Margarita Castillo, was living in Queens, not that far away.
Yes?
Margarita, right? Hi, I'm Detective Resnick at NYPD. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about a case you might have recently had.
They try and talk to her about baby Hope.
No, I don't know anything.
Please, it'll just take a few minutes.
No.
She was very evasive, not very cooperative. She doesn't want to get involved.
I can help you.
Please,
Sorry.
it'll just take a few minutes.
But remember, they had a DNA profile of baby Hope. So from there, they were able to get an envelope with Margarita's saliva on it, and they were able to compare against baby Hope's DNA profile.
So, Margarita, which DNA samples you gave us, and we took them to the lab. It came up with a match.
showed her the proof.
I was wondering.
And then finally, the sketch.
Do you?
Angelica.
She admitted that Baby Hope was her daughter, and her real name was Angelica Castillo.
Angelica?
And I was so happy. 22 years later, now she's finally a person. She's identified, and now we can find out what really happened.
From there, police were able to get Margarita's version of the story. And Margarita explained that they had come to the United States in the 80s illegally from Mexico. They were undocumented immigrants at the time.
She told detectives that she and her husband had a really nasty split, and he took her two daughters, Angelica and Maribel, to go live with him.
And at that time, her husband Gennaro had gone to Astoria, Queens, to live with his brother's wife, Balvina.
Margarita told authorities that she had repeatedly gone there to try to visit them, but he wouldn't allow her to have any contact with them. And because of her relationship with Gennaro was very abusive, she felt really powerless to do anything.
Especially when Gennaro would threaten her or the girls with violence if she didn't back off.
I will kill you.
So now you have this woman who's trapped. Her daughters have been taken from her. She's here illegally. She's terrified. Didn't know where to turn.
Many years later, she said one of her daughters was returned to her, but not the other, and nobody told her what happened to Angelica.
Do you know where the father is right now?
No.
Margarita eventually heard that Gennaro had gone back to Mexico and said she believed that Angelica was with him, but she didn't know whether she was safe or not.
I couldn't go to the police because
she feared that something terrible could have befallen her, but she felt powerless to go to authorities because she was an illegal immigrant. She had other children to take care of, and she couldn't take the risk of reporting a possible crime and being deported.
Baby Hope's mother says she still remembers thinking one day she'll find her daughter. Unable to hold back tears, Angelica's mother describes the moment she realized her daughter wasn't coming back.
When detectives got here and they showed me the pictures, that's where all the hope was lost. That one day my child would maybe turn up as a grown-up.
So now finally the public had Baby Hope's backstory, where she had come from, how she ended up here. What the public didn't know was, how did she end up murdered? How did she end up in the cooler? Who was it who had dumped the cooler by the side of the Henry Hudson Parkway 22 years earlier? There were still so many questions that had not been answered in this case. But there was one person that investigators believed would have the answers. Angelica's father. And detectives knew who Angelica's father was, so now they needed to find him. But that proved a lot harder than expected.
Detectives found out that he had moved to Mexico, but they could not track him down anywhere. It was as though he had vanished.
But of course they weren't going to give up. They'd come this far.
Police found out that while Angelica was living in Balvina's apartment, there were other people living there as well.
And when they investigated, they found a monster hiding in plain sight. Investigators had just uncovered that Baby Hope's father didn't kill his child, but he probably knew who did.
Detectives found out that Angelica was living with the father, but at the time there was another adult male in the household living there, and his name was Conrado Juarez.
This was a bad guy. He had all sorts of charges of assault against him, some sexual in nature. He had a reputation as he's not the guy you want around your kids.
That to me, I mean, obviously, the father was aware that a family member committed that crime, and he did nothing about it. I just have a hard time understanding this.
So if Conrado had been the one to kill Angelica, he should have been off the streets 22 years earlier. And now they needed to find him immediately.
They tracked him down at the Italian restaurant where he worked as a dishwasher and took him back to the police station for questioning.
Nada, do you know who murdered Angelica Castillo? You sure? You think you have to tell me, I would do it right now. Para servir la verdad, señor. Por favor. Es para la muchacha. Sí. Y seguimos para él.
Le hablé y le digo, Tania, le digo, ven para acá.
And did she agree?
Ella aceptó.
Sí.
Yes.
Conrado said that on the night she was murdered, he was very drunk.
Entonces cuando pues el alcohol me hizo perder el control.
He told authorities that as he was trying to rape her, she began to struggle, and he put a pillow over her face and suffocated her.
And when he realized that she was dead, he calls his sister for help.
What have you done? Are you crazy? Why did you do this? Why? Let me think about it.
En ese momento, la hermana, hablé con ella y ella la idea dice, pues ahorita dice, vamos a poner, dice, ahí te dice, tengo una hielera, pero lo vamos a poner en la hielera, pero dice, el cuerpecito está grande.
They tied her up, dipped her body in a plastic bag, and put it in a sturdy cooler. And he said he put soda cans on top, and she went and helped him get rid of the evidence.
And the fact that Conrado Juarez got another adult involved who was supposed to be her protector, who didn't help, didn't do anything to intervene, and together they disposed of her body, makes you question humanity, because how is it possible? How is it possible that you get two people to do this together?
The remarkable thing is that after all these years, it turned out that that very first tip was true.
Conrado and Balbina were the two people responsible for carrying the cooler. The man and the female that were seen were now identified as them two.
What cops found out
wasn't just that they were co-conspirators in Angelica's death, but that this was not the first time that she had been harmed by these two people.
Conrado also revealed they would often tie her to a desk or a table with rope, like an animal, so she couldn't go into the fridge, so she couldn't open the fridge to get food.
Gruesome details were learned about how she was starved, how she was mistreated. So not only did she not get to live out her life, the people who were supposed to be her protectors contributed to her death. That's the saddest part. She was not protected as she should have been. That was her right.
Good afternoon, NYPD detectives from the Bronx Violent Felony Squad apprehended Conrado Juarez, age 52, of the Bronx, in connection with the murder of 4-year-old Angelica Castillo.
Conrado Juarez was arraigned in Manhattan Criminal Court on October 12, 2013, on a charge of second-degree murder in the 1991 death of 4-year-old Angelica Castillo.
Unfortunately, his sister was never arrested because she died before we found out who was responsible for this.
There was at least some semblance that the city, which had become her de facto family, had gotten the closure it had been denied for 22 years.
And the detectives ultimately fulfilled their promise to Angelica to keep her memory alive and to eventually catch her killer. And they did.
How do I feel now? You know the expression I'm on cloud 9? Well, that's where I am not right now.
I think I could sum up my feelings in 3 words. I'm very proud. I'm proud of this department. I'm proud of the detectives.
It was an honor to know that I was part of an elite group of people that solved that case. Too many years went by.
I'm just glad that the person who did this was put to justice. But it doesn't change that she's not here, and she should be.
Who knows what she could have been? She could have had a cure for cancer one day. Her life just started, and that was taken away from her. But now she's not Baby Hope anymore. She's Angelica again. She was given a name from her birth. Maybe that's what she was. An angel.